Okay. Let me move things around so I'm not just getting completely distracted by my own recording. Hi. Hello. I'm Rachel, and this is my book club. Welcome to the book club. It's Vampires Are My Special Interest Book Club. Once you're in it, you can't leave, and you're in it now because I just said welcome to the book club. Anyway, we read vampire books here, obviously, and occasionally vampire adjacent things. But currently, we are reading vampire books, including this book that we started last stream. But I'm not sure many people watched the last stream, so you don't know that I already started it. It is up, so if you want to catch the first story, just go back a week, But it is from the Sisters of the Night book, edited by Barbara Hambly and Martin H. Greenberg. It was published in 1995, I believe. Nice little cover there. Got it at my used bookstore. Support your local used bookstore. Fuck Amazon. But if you have to get it there, get it there. I don't care, actually. Just wanted to say in general, fuck Amazon. So we have read Empty by M. John Harrison. And we are going to read Madeleine by Barbara Hambly next. They also edited the book and wrote the introduction, so why not throw their own story into their book? Okay. Ooh. I don't like being big. Look at the pretty picture of the sky that I took. Pretend that it's a spooky picture of the sky and get into character. Get into the theme. The young man's name was Philip. He was a solicitor's clerk somewhere in the city, thin and very fair. Madeleine liked fair and slender young men. On winter evenings, she would watch them from the shadows of an alleyway at one end of the street where all the firms had their offices. The lighted windows were like illuminated pictures in the city's cindery winter dusks. Clerks in frock cloaks closing up the ledgers, returning deed boxes to high shelves. She pictured the movement of the muscles under their shirts, thought about the texture of the lips under those brave attempts at mustaches, imagined the taste, the freshness of the soft skin between high celluloid collar and ear. They would come out into the gaslight of the narrow street, pulling on their gloves, chattering with one another happily about the matters dear to the hearts of young men: tobacco, boating, cards, girls. Sometimes Madeleine would follow one of them. In the summer, when the darkness did not fully come until nearly 9 o'clock, she would lie in her coffin and stretch out her awareness, listening across the city for their voices, fragile and light as the voices of children playing in some other part of a great garden. She could trace them, every one, if she concentrated, pick out a certain set of footsteps, the jaunty whistling of a popular waltz, through the clamoring of carriage wheels and hooves on cobbles, the yammering of costermongers trying to dispose of the day's staple wares, and the whooping oompa of tavern bands, trace them sometimes each back to his own shabby rooms. When full dark came, sweet with the gluey warmth of the city summer, she would set forth in her glitter of lace and jet to find the streets where they lived. This was what she did with Philip. She watched him for weeks, for young clerks were her hobby, her treat, rather than the staple of her nights. He lived with a woman named Olivia, 5 or 6 years older than he, a sort of blue stocking, who pursued studies in the old library at the university. And I would like to note, I did write down the definition of a blue stocking, which is an intellectual or literary woman. We're learning things today. Madeleine would see them through the lace curtains of her flat when the lights were up in the darkness, talking as they cooked supper, hands waving with the earnestness of lovers, brandishing sausages at one another at the end of forks, or else would listen to them make love from where she stood on the flagway, or in the next street, or 3 blocks away, seeking out the sound through all the night sounds of the city, All the lovers, all the children playing on the night pavements, all the parents arguing over money or dreams. She knew how their breaths entwined, heard the words the woman said, surprisingly coarse for that tall, thin, old maidish form, that narrow, bespectacled face, and the soft little sound Philip would make between a gasp and a whimper at her touch. It was that sound that decided Madeleine, that and the fineness of his skin. She waited until Olivia departed on some journey of several days, then encountered Philip, as if by accident, in the street on his way back to his flat. She took him that night, draining his blood until he collapsed, fainting, in her arms, stroking his face, his throat, his shoulders with her long, glassy fingernails, as he lay in the tangle of his bed sheets, gazing up at her with wonder and terror in his wandering brown eyes. She treasured him so much she left him a little alive, and when she lay at dawn in her coffin in the expensive and heavily secured townhouse that was hers, she sleepily, satedly probed out with her mind to hear his labored gasps as he struggled for air, picturing him lying there in extremity, unable to even to call for help. She took that picture down with her into the dreamless vampire sleep and hoped vaguely that he would live until night. He was alive when she threw back the tall windows from his balcony again. It was clear to her that no one had come to help to him all day. He only just managed to turn his head on the pillows when she came in, and she treasured the movement. Why am I messing up so many words? He only just managed to turn his head on the pillow when she came in, and she treasured the moment of his exquisite despair. He had known all day that she would be back with the darkness. She savored that, as much as she savored the blood that finally drew out his life. 2 nights later, Madeleine went to the cemetery of St. Joseph to see his tomb. It was a family tomb, like a gray granite temple. He had been the younger son of some bourgeoisie with aspirations to the professions. I always feel so smart and accomplished when I can see the word and I know how to pronounce bourgeoisie. I'm so French. Ooh. In the warm gloom of the late spring evening, the smell of mortar was sharp in the air, contrasting with the waxy pugnance of funeral wreaths. Madeleine had killed on her way there, a carpet seller in his grimy shop near the bank of the river, a man no one would miss, except perhaps his wife, if he had one, and probably not her much. So she felt indulgent with the world, as she moved through the darkness of tombs and ivy and ornamental trees toward the place. A veiled woman stood on the tomb steps, but though Madeleine walked with a vampire's soundless, weightless stride, the woman seemed to hear and raised her head, putting back her veil with hands gloved in shabby and mended black kid. Her spectacles flashed like all-seeing eyes in the dark. "I thought that you would come here," she said. Madeleine laughed. Men had told her, before they died, before they knew what she was and the extent of their danger, that she had a laugh like silver bells, with the cold tinkling of glass chimes. "Oh, it's one who knows, is it?" she mocked. Olivia stood for some moments, regarding her in the near-total darkness beneath the trees. With the sight of night-walking things, Madeleine could see this woman quite clearly, not precisely beautiful, with her long, narrow face and those enormous gray eyes behind the thick rounds of glass, but oddly compelling. Her brown hair was piled on her head beneath the veiled black hat, and her hands, though narrow, were as long as a man's. She must have the most dreadful time finding gloves, thought the vampire, with detached amusement. If her feet are anything like in proportion, she probably hunts all over the city for shoes. Madeleine's own hands and feet were small, exquisite, and high-buttoned shoes handmade for her by an old man on the fringes of financial district. The money she'd taken from the carpet seller shop, from Philip's desk drawer, would probably go toward paying for another pair. "Nobody will believe you, you know," she said, coming closer, dainty as a bisque doll in her small-waisted gown, the silk taffeta of her petticoats murmuring like last fall's leaves on the grass. "They never do. What did his family put it down that he died of? A wasting sickness." Then she stopped, for Olivia was not backing away from her, not hiding her face. She only stood, looking at Madeleine with a kind of calm sadness, like, Madeleine thought in irritation, some placid cow observing her over a fence. "And that is all that he was to you?" Olivia said. "Darling, how can you say that?" Madeleine smiled dreamily. "He was a desperately sweet boy, as I'm sure you know, my dear. I've always had a terrible weakness for sweet boys." Her smile broadened to make her white teeth gleam. She felt warm throughout and powerful, the blood of the carpet seller rich and sweet in her veins for all his unprepossessing appearance. Sometimes one dines on caviar, she thought, and other times on pot roast. Her cheeks, she knew, would be rosy with the flush of stolen life, her lips dark crimson. Olivia's face was as white as her own had been when she'd risen from her coffin with the coming of night. What, are you worried he'll turn into a wicked, wicked vampire like me? The woman shook her head. No, I know that is not how vampires are made. Oh, Madeleine formed a little moe with her lips. A scholar, no less. After a fashion, Olivia stepped forward suddenly and lifted her hand. Madeleine scented the coldness of silver on her, a great deal of silver. Under that black morning dress with its high collar and long sleeves, she must have chains of it, circling her throat and her wrists, perhaps small discs sewn into the flounces of her petticoats, the cotton of her corset cover. Madeleine stepped back, her flower-like nostrils flaring. Flower-like nostrils? Jesus Christ. Don't try it, she said, and her voice was suddenly a snarl. I'm warning you, my dear. Just because you know what I am doesn't mean you can do anything about it. The blood I have taken, the lives I have taken, are all within me, giving me strength. All your learning and all your study can't prevail against that. No, replied Olivia. You took their blood, and you took their lives, uncaring of who they were and what they were, only to add to your own life and strength. Madeleine laughed again, not the sweet silver bell laugh of the lady now, but cruel and hard and scornful. Who and what were they? Who and what they were? They were ordinary, darling. Ordinary and common and dull, like yourself, I'm afraid. Are we really going to go through a sermon of how evil I am? I expected more of you. Is that why you came here? Olivia spoke, without irony, without trace of anger in her clear gray eyes. Because you expected something of me? I'm sorry to disappoint you. You took their blood, and you took their lives, and so all I can do is charge you to be aware of what you have taken, to be fully aware. Then maybe you will not be so quick to do it again. Madeleine was angry now, irritated at the argument and impatient to leave. She considered taking this woman here and now, for the cemetery was utterly deserted, but her native caution prevailed. First, because Olivia had come prepared, her clothing thick with hidden silver, and Madeleine was not sure she could overpower the other woman without getting badly burned. Second, because the vampires of the city lived upon the city's poor. If too many young and handsome clerks died in too rapid succession, or if family members or lovers died too, even if not upon the very grave of the earlier victim, the police would begin to inquire. There were priests and strange old scholars at the university who knew things that other men scorned to believe, and it did not do to bring matters too much to their attention. And third? No, thought Madeleine, backing from Olivia until she was little more than a glitter of jet beads, like colorless fire within the smoke of her lace. There is no third reason. This woman is only a stupid woman, praying and sniveling over a man she couldn't even keep. There was no third reason. But she found no cutting remark, no perfect exit line upon which to make her departure, so she had to content herself with saying, "Fool, 1,000 times a fool," as she faded into the night. Olivia, standing upon the steps of the granite tomb, did not move until she was gone. Pause to drink. Lying in her coffin at dawn, Madeleine let her mind rove through the city, tasting the final perfumes of the night. Mist rising from the river, the smell of the hay barges coming in from the country, the voices of market women at their barrows. "'Ere, get 'em fresh, new from the country, cucumbers cool as ice." Prostitutes gathering in the cafes for a final cup of coffee before going home. "Well, I'll give him the money, if he wants to gamble so bad, but damned if I'll let that bastard tell me what to do in me spare time." Small children waking and being got ready for school. The wheels of milk wagons rocking over pavements beneath chestnut trees. The self-satisfied purring of cats padding up stone steps for the first cream of the day. Summer was coming, a bad time for vampires in northern latitudes. But there was an enchantment to it, too, returning to her coffin long before sleep was ready to come, and lying in its darkness for hours before it was safe to rise. Madeleine walked through the city with her ears, with her mind. Frequently she chose her victims that way, only later trying to trace down their voices, their footfalls, their smells. It gave her amusement and a sense of keenness to her hunt. So I says to my wife, I says, how you gonna deal with a man like that? He brings carpets in from the east, he says. Madeleine twitched uncomfortably in her narrow coffin as a memory from last night's pre-dawn dozing intruded into her mind. Whose voice was that? Yes, the carpet seller, a loud bore, and no loss to anyone. His voice grated even yet in her memory. Them guys that go to Turkey all the time, buying up carpets, they gotta be a little crazy, you know? You could get yourself killed traveling around on some cockamamie camel or donkey or whatever, carrying money 'cause they don't got no banks there. She tried to push the voice from her mind, tried to silence her thoughts. She hadn't heard the old man's grating voice for more than a few minutes last night, and her after-sunset rambles, looking almost at random for a victim in the swarming alleys of the riverside slums, she had heard it again and remembered it from that half-dozing listening. Had heard it then and had smiled. She remembered thinking, his wife will probably thank me. Why did she hear him say now? Rachel and me, 30 years we've been married. You think she remembers which tie I always wear on Sabbath? Always she's asking me, what tie you gonna wear on shawl, Jack Goff? Like she hasn't seen me put on the red one every goddamn Sabbath. Shut up, old man, Madeleine thought savagely, and turned her mind away, seeking the darkness of sleep, the quiet of dreams. But she was still awake when, long after sunrise, the day-duty policeman walked past the house whistling opera, and the gardener came to tend the place and make it look like it was lived in. Though, during the day, none of the neighbors ever saw movement behind the locked doors, the drawn blinds. When she slept, there was no quiet in her sleep. Madeleine woke feeling somewhat refreshed, but only by carefully I'm a little too tired tonight. It's rainy, and rain always makes me sleepy. I hate it. Sorry for all the mistakes. We can do this. Probably. Okay. Madeleine woke feeling somewhat refreshed, but only by careful concentration on the sounds outside could she avoid remembering what the carpet seller's voice sounded like. For a time she lay, listening and breathing in the sense of the coming night, feeling her mind and senses stir, her blood and her hunger rise. She remembered, more than the carpet seller, the woman Olivia, and felt a vicious desire to seek her out and kill her, though she knew that such a thing was out of question for months, if ever. Still, when she rose at last from her coffin, when she slipped out of the cloud of lace that was her negligee, and stroked her cold, slim, white body in the blood-orange glow of the lamplight, when she dressed carefully, and dove-gray this time, all trimmed with black lace like a tabby cat, she found herself thinking she wanted a woman. The woman she killed was tall and gawky and wore spectacles, though she was older than Olivia, and getting fat with the starchy diet of the working poor. She was a seamstress, stitching over lamplight to finish a client's order before some party tomorrow night. Madeleine was careful not to get blood on the shimmering apricot silk, which she then held up to herself before the seamstress's long mirror. It was a little too big, but she took it anyway, liking the fabric. It would not take much, she told herself, to alter it to her own more fragile body. That she had nearly 30 such dresses, taken in the confidence of alteration she had no concept of how to perform, did not cross her mind. All those were out of style by this time anyway. She did not even realize whose voice she heard in her mind, like the memory of an overheard conversation, as she was walking the dark streets, watching the night go by. Poor Alicia was in labor with her for 2 days. No wonder the dear little thing was so sickly as a child, she seemed to hear a woman's gentle voice say. But she was always smart as paint. Her father would never hear of her going with the other children to Sunday school to learn reading, but little Nicole, when she was 4 years old, she slipped out of the house and ran away with her friend Lettice. You remember Lettice, that dear red-headed girl? It's probably like Lettice or something. Lettice, but I'm gonna call this child Lettice. Madeleine shook her head angrily, her admiration of the ghostly shimmer of lights through river mist, broken by that constant murmuring recollection. So I says to him, Maury, I says, you want me to pay top price for a piece of carpet some Muslim heathen has had laying out in front of his shop for donkeys to walk over? Is that what you're telling me? Darn, thought Madeleine furiously. Don't let that infernal carpet seller start up again. She tried to turn her mind away, to think of something else, but all that would come to her was the woman's soft voice, talking about her children. Endlessly. Madeleine usually didn't kill twice in a night, but she felt the desperate need for the intense concentration of the hunt to take her mind off those voices. She made her way to the poorest section of town and found a beggar, a wretched and whining specimen no one would miss, and, because she needed excitement, let him see her, let him know her for what she was, with the seamstress's blood still on her mouth and the flames of hell gleaming in her eyes. She pursued the man through the dripping and filthy alleys, cutting him off easily when he tried to run to pubs and police stations where there were lights and people, driving him back into the garbage-smelling lanes that fronted the docks, feeling her own excitement rise with the stepped-up pounding of his heart, the frantic heat of his blood. The little man was sobbing, mumbling desperate prayers to a half-forgotten God, unable to run or even to stand any more when she overtook him at last, and then she let him escape her 2 or 3 times, pursuing him languidly, easily, in the dark. When she was done, she threw his body in the river and watched the tide take it out. I never had the chance other people got. Madeleine woke up, broad awake, though she knew it was barely past noon. Ma, she always said we wasn't supposed to smoke her tobacco, so whenever any of her tobacco was missing, my brothers would tell her it was me that took it, just me, not them or anything, and I'd be the one that got the buckle end of the belt. It was always the same. Look, I can't help it if I'm little. I can't help it if I had this twisted foot. The swell of rage in her was like a heat about to blow the lid off the coffin. So you'd think a boy with opportunities like that, he'd go into business for his father, wouldn't you? Nice shop, good money, seat and shawl by the eastern wall for high holy days. I wanted Elizabeth, that's my oldest, to have the best education, to have the best start in the world she can get. That's why I took in extra work, to get her proper schooling, though the nuns at St. Irene's are terribly expensive, and I do have to make her extra clothing, because some of the girls there are so unkind. Still, when I offered the Mother Superior to do the embroidery on the new altar cloth, the heat was followed by cold, and the terrible first sinking drop of fear. She understood whose those voices were, speaking chattily in her head. That bitch. I'll kill her. I'll ram her sniveling voices down her throat. Madeleine had never been awake in the daytime. Another time she might have savored the experience, the overpowering weight of languor that made even the movement of a hand into effort. Might even have tracked the policeman by his whistling, Rossini and Verdi, back to his house, to call upon him some night on his way back from the pub. But now all she heard was the carpet seller's diatribes on the shortcomings of his suppliers, the seamstress's gentle praise of her children, the beggar's complaints about his ill health, poverty, and misuse by his next-door neighbor's dog. She did not sleep from noon until the coming of dark. Thanks to her double meal of the night before, she rose at last not hungry. As a general rule, Madeleine spent considered... Okay. Good Lord. As a general rule, Madeleine spent considerable time in her townhouse, preparing for the hunt, washing, curling her witch black hair, sometimes only stroking her body, observing the trim perfection of the pink-tipped apples of her breasts. I wish I hadn't said that. I didn't enjoy reading that to the internet. Pretend I didn't. The slight bony projections of hip bone and knee, running her hands down the small of her back to feel the tiny indentations there, one on either side of the spine, which only slender and perfect women had. Then she would stand naked before her huge armoires, possibly. Realizing I've been saying that in my head wrong my entire life. Until literally this moment. Oh, God. Holding up dress after dress, intent on matching each ensemble exactly with her mood of that night and the image she desired to portray. Would she be the gracious lady extending favors tonight? The mysterious stark beauty? The deadly serpent? Tonight she pulled on a walking suit of black shot red, like old blood. She will see me in my rage, she thought with bitter fury. She will see the kind of danger she has tampered with, and she will rue the night she brought herself to my attention. You know, I see people passing me by every day, and you know, they could afford a couple of coins, whined a voice in her mind. I don't ask for a lot, but I can't work. My constitution won't take the strain of a factory job, and I never had the education for one of the professions, though Father Benjamin at the church, he always said I had the brains for it. The windows of the flat that Olivia had shared with the beautiful Philip were dark when Madeleine reached the street. By the glow of the gas lights, she could see that the lace curtains which had hung there were gone. The rooms were empty of everything save dust, and the faintly mealy smell of Olivia's books, and Madeleine's rage had made her hungry. Down in the street again, she heard passing footfalls and looked around, her anger seeking the outlet of blood, the drugged satisfaction of the warming of her cold flesh. But she heard one of the women passing say to the other, in a voice that would have scratched glass, "Well, you know how he gets when he's drunk, and I wasn't gonna get me a black eye just for the satisfaction of breaking a bottle over his greasy skull." She thought about hearing that voice over and over in her mind and shuddered. But her hunger did not ease, and knowing that she could not immediately slake it, it became all she could think about. All she could think about, that is, in between what Rachel's parents did on the occasion of last Passover, and how Alicia had gotten married to Nicole's father in the first place. You took their blood and you took their lives, Olivia had said, so all I can do is charge you to be aware of what you have taken. Bitching, stinking, ordinary cattle, thought Madeleine furiously. What the hell does she know about it? What the hell does she know about me? But there was fear in her heart as she moved off through the city to find others who might know what to do, others who had made her what she was, and had taught her the hidden ways, the little tricks, the secret joys. She went quickly, as if she were being pursued, but found that she could not outrace the voices in her mind. You hear their voices in your mind? Of your victims? Sazerac burst into a whoop of delighted laughter. Sazerac? Caesaric. I don't know this name. It isn't funny, cried Madeleine furiously, but the cool, fine-boned face, white as silk by the gaslights of his parlor, convulsed with amusement almost to tears. Good Lord, Count, what if you were forced to listen to yours? Chuckled Cecile, the master vampire's new favorite, taller than Madeleine and fuller of figure, and without her serpentine dancer's grace. In an exaggerated nasal imitation of lower-class accents, the blonde vampire continued, Gee, are you a real count? Like with a cattle? Ooh, is that an honest-to-Christ ruby? Oh, Count. Sazerac collapsed into renewed gales of mirth. Cecile's eyes, pale blue and cold as sapphires, danced maliciously. She looked up at Madeleine. What, darling, are you actually spending time thinking about their nasty little lives? She, like Madeleine, for Sazerac had made and initiated them both, dressed for whatever role she planned to play in her hunt, and tonight she had evidently been a temptress. Flushed, pale rose with the eternal warmth of her kill, her breasts rose like thick cream above a low-cut gown of amber silk, intricately beaded on the bodice, so that in the warm half-light of Sazerac's townhouse parlor, she resembled a florid golden dragon in her lair. Not any more than I can help, gritted Madeleine. Tell me I've been saying it Madeleine and not Madeleine. Is it Madeleine? Oh God, I don't remember. No! I'm about to completely change the way I said her name because I don't remember how I've been saying it. Okay. My darling, I'm sorry I laughed. Sazerac pulled out a hand to cup Madeleine's cheek, but his white lips still twitched with the effort not to giggle again. Truly, forgive me. I'm currently in hell because there's too many names. Oh my God. What can I do? Begged Madeleine, trying not to sound as if she were begging, not in front of Cecile, possibly not in front of Sazerac. The woman has left this city. Who can I go to remove this charge, this curse? Try a priest, purred Cecile. That way, if he doesn't lift the curse, at least you can hear mass all night afterward. Nerves rubbed beyond endurance. Madeleine spun on her in a flash of fury, but Sazerac laid a reproving hand on the arm of each woman. My darling, he said gently to Madeleine. Madeleine. It's gotta be Madeleine. You need perspective on this. It's a dreadful thing, yes, but you know it's something that will fade and must, simply with usage. Oh, I don't know. Cecile laid one white, rounded arm along the back of the green-black velvet couch, which she shared with the vampire count. One's love of new sensation doesn't. Or, at least, it hasn't for me, and you say it has not for you. One's relish for the touch of every sunset, the taste of each new kill, those don't fade. This is different, said Sazerac quickly, and if not, his face made a grab at sobriety and then dissolved into laughter again. And if not, think what a time you'll have searching the city for a mute. Toward morning, driven by hunger, Madeleine killed a child. After 7.5 hours of listening to the little boy's unceasing and utterly unvarying complaint about the disappearance of his toy horse, she regretted it. She had forgotten how infuriatingly persistent children can be. Whether she slept or not during the day or the days following, she was not sure. If she did, the voices persisted into her dreams, until she was ready to swear that they were all sitting in the great, heavily curtained bedroom in a circle around her coffin, each yammering on about his or her own affairs, like hideously ill-mannered guests. She woke exhausted, her nerves scraped raw, the monologues intruding into her thoughts, preventing her from listening to the world outside. She spent the dark hours pacing the streets of the city, searching, listening, trying to stretch out her crippled senses to pick up the whisper of the woman, Olivia's voice, the sound of her sensible heeled shoes clacking on the pavement, the smell of her books, her bath powder, her hair. She searched the old library, the university quarter with its steep, soot-black buildings jostling one another along the riverbank, among ancient churches and crumbling fountains and half-forgotten squares. There were young men there, studying late by lamplight or tupping shop girls in their garrets. She thought about killing one of them, for hunger was driving her frantic. But every time she listened to their conversations, she drew back. Dear God, don't let me get a law student, or one who's having trouble with his girlfriend. They all seem to be having trouble with their girlfriends, or else they belonged to doctrinaire communist groups. Vociferous. Why are these words happening? Vociferously protesting the government's latest policies, or were having philosophical crises of conscience about the meaning of their lives. Madeleine killed rats instead, though they did little for her hunger, and went hungry to bed. She woke feeling as if she had spent the day being dragged over broken bottles and cobblestones. She grew thin and edgy. The voices did not fade with familiarity, as Sazerac had promised. Rather, they grew, rehashing the old topics over and over endlessly. Sometimes she turned positive Jakoff, the carpet seller, was walking along at her heels. It was as if they goddamn. Hold on. Reset the brain. Shake it out. Sometimes she turned positive Jakoff, the carpet seller, was walking along at her heels. It was as if their reality grew with feeding. There was no satisfaction to be had in the blood of animals. By 2 a.m, she felt that the only way to obtain relief for even a few hours, was to hunt, to kill, as she had hunted the beggar. She stalked a dock worker for hours and never heard him speak one word, not until after he was dead, and she was lying in her coffin once again, hearing his constant, muttered, foul-mouthed spew about his hatred of rich women and how he was going to beat the tar out of his slur foreman if the butt licker ordered him around one more time. She spent 2 more nights without killing, listening to the voices unabated all around her. Hunger and the need for the kill clouded her mind, robbed her of whatever pleasure in life she had left. She tried killing a novelist, reflecting at least that his conversation should be interesting, and discovered that novelists' chief concerns are their royalties, and how their publishers and agents conspire to rob them, and whether their wives are cheating on them, and with whom. That feels kind of pointed. That was kind of a pointed joke by an author. The following week, she killed a young woman of breeding and refinement, and was driven nearly to the screaming point by meticulous speculations about glove length, the genealogies of acquaintances, and who should sit next to whom at dinner. Sazerac and Cecile sought her out the night after that and warned her. A sweet young man or a tender girl is all very well, 2, maybe 3 times a year, the master vampire said gravely, toying with the small cup of Café Noir and the blaze of gaslight at the Café New York. He inhaled deeply, savoring the perfumes of the ladies at the next tables, the expensive tobaccos which permeated the clothing of the fashionable gentlemen who strolled by on the flagway outside. In Madeleine's mind, the stevedore cursed at the bosses who cheated him, and the pansy F-slurs who wouldn't even throw him a tip. The child cried shrilly, "David took my horse! David took my horse! He's going to break it! David took my horse!" But you mustn't make a habit of it, my dear Madeleine. Why do I keep flip-flopping on how to say her name? Madeleine. Oh my god. He took her chin in his hand, gazed deep in her eyes, and there was no pity in his, only a dangerous, steely glint. You had your fun with your little attorney's clerk. You know the rules. Too many deaths of a wasting sickness will have the police wondering about the strange marks on the bodies, wondering about old legends. You have me and Cecile to think of as well, you know. She whispered, "You don't understand." The eyes did not soften one fraction with the smile that only moved the pale lips. What? Still fretting about your silly voices? I thought you were stronger than that. Cecile rose, her eyes already following a dusky-skinned young waiter who was pocketing his tips, taking off his apron, joking with his friends about finding a girl on his way home. "Just see," she said, "that it doesn't happen again." But of course it did. Those with some education, some style of living, at least did not have the obsessive narrowness, the foul-mouthed resentments common to so many of the poor. One hot morning, as Madeleine lay tossing wretchedly in her coffin, she heard voices outside, hushed and grim, and knew them for detectives, heard a man's quiet voice say, "Have you ever wondered, gentlemen, why so many of the old legends all speak of the same things?" She knew, as she listened to the sounds of the endless summer twilight, that she must shift her quarters, and shift them soon. But she had not fed properly in 2 nights, only cats and dogs, and it was difficult for her to think. Even more difficult, with the hectic clamor going on in her head, complaining, worrying, recounting old stories of loved ones, detailing conversations with friends, and the minutiae of the lives she had stolen. She tried to concentrate on a letter to her house agent, on plans for emergency quarters, but her hunger made her insane with restlessness, and the voices would give her no peace. She ended by going out to hunt, with the high summer twilight barely gone from the sky, and all the world smelling of lilacs in the river, and killed a young girl sitting alone on her balcony, speculating, it turned out, about whether Thomas or Louis, or perhaps George, loved her the most, and how she was going to get Andrew to propose to her, and whether she should get the shell pink silk made up into a dress, or the oyster taffeta. Madeleine heard about it all. She was lying awake, gritting her teeth in fury and wretchedness, when she heard, beneath the cacophony of the voices, the crash of a rear window breaking, the snap of a latch. Her mind drugged and thick with lack of sleep, with the logginess of daytime. She thrust the lid of the coffin back, struggling to rise. Her limbs felt weighted, sodden, almost as if those who jangled and bickered in her head were clinging to her wrists, her negligee, her feet. The room was pitch black. She couldn't seem to open her eyes, couldn't keep them open. She fell, weak and muzzy with the daylight she knew had to be outside. In the depths of the house she heard men's footfalls, smelled their bodies, the sweat of their shirts and the mud of their shoes. Her mind reached out to hear their voices, to tell her what to flee, but all she heard was, "Told Rachel once, I told her 1,000 times, you can't trust those door-to-door salesmen for anything. That soap is worthless." "Shut up, you old bastard. I'd kill you if I hadn't already." And do you know what that editor said to me? He said I didn't kill enough people in that story. He said there's paper and a pen in the next room, and here's your manuscript. And you go in there right now and write me another death scene. David took my horse. She blundered into a door, fumbled the knob, trying desperately to open her eyes. Rooms thickly curtained, lightless. Why did she feel, when she pulled the door open, that the chamber was crowded with people all talking as they came toward her? But if I seat Geoffrey next to Caroline, that will put Caroline across from Mr. Fontaine. And after what Mrs. Fontaine said about Caroline's sister, we can't risk that. Get away from me. Lousy, no good women. Hump any man they see. I'd beat the lot of them with a strap, the filthy horse. Damn. I never was strong enough to join the army, you see. If I had been, my whole life would have been different, but they'd never take me because I'm small. Get away from me. She wasn't aware she'd screamed it aloud until she heard footfalls in the stairwell, and then she wasn't even sure, for there seemed to be footfalls all around her, dark figures. Her eyes felt gummed as she stumbled, weaving like a drunken woman, seeking the hall, the back stairs, the cellar. Get away, get away. So I said, Rachel, I said, is it any shame to make a little money off Goyim? Swine who just as soon burn my shop down as look at me just because I'm a Jew? David took my horse. She could almost feel small hands clinging to the fragile stuff of her nightgown. But you see, if Andrew proposes to me, I'd have to accept him, because if I turn him down this time, he'll ask Violet, and I can't let him marry her. Only I don't want to get married either. At least not to Andrew. She fell against walls, stumbled, barking her knees on the sharp edges of stairs. Darkness everywhere, voices shouting behind her, less real to her than the jabbering in her head. I charge you to be aware of what you've taken. Their blood and their lives. Her hands groped at the door latch, her head lolling on her shoulders, her knees like water. For some reason, the metal was warm under her hand. The cellar door. It had to be the cellar door. Then she opened the door, and like a colorless moth bumping blindly from a cellar, staggered outside until the all-devouring blaze of light and heat. The detectives and the priest buried what they found, the pile of bone and ash, and rags still smoking on the threshold of the rear door. It took only a small space in the municipal potter's field. The priest and the elderly scholar from the university who had been with them came back later and mixed certain holy things in the earth of the grave to give its inhabitant what rest they could. The following night a woman came to the cemetery, veiled in black. She found the grave easily by the voices that whispered around it in the warm night air. "Who are you?" she asked the first voice. "What is your name?" "My name is Jakoff Bernstein," said the voice. "I sell carpets down by the river. I have a wife, Rachel. Is she all right?" "I will tell her," said Olivia, "that you are all right now." And she told him in the Yiddish that he best understood, for she had been a scholar of languages at the university before her studies had led her into other and stranger paths. How to find his way across to the world where he must go now. He must now go. Wait, he now must go. Fucking hell. To the world where he now must go, and how to release his hold on this one. And what is your name? She asked again. I'm Emma Normand, said the woman's voice. I'm Elizabeth's mother, and Annette's, and little Gerard's. I've been so worried. They will all be well, said Olivia. As well as any can be in this world. Go now and be in peace. So many, she thought, listening to the voices of the shades, that they were fewer than the number of days that had passed since Philip had died. That was something. For a long time she stood, hearing their names, hearing what they said about their concerns, their families, their lives. Even the stevedore Finn and the beggar Lucius Delval. When she had heard them out, she gave them such instructions as she thought they would understand, and let them go. From the earth beneath her feet came no sound, no whisper from the ashes and the bones. It was almost dawn when she left Madeleine's grave, disappearing into the luminous summer darkness, the silence like still water. As she passed out of sight beneath the trees, almost hesitantly, a bird began to sing. Thoughts, comments, concerns. I liked that story a lot, and I enjoyed reading it for you and also on my own when I got this book earlier. It was a lovely little story. I didn't like the surprise slurs just thrown at me like twice in there. Really just makes you stop and go, huh. Okay. But a sweet little revenge story, just making her stop and actually know the people that she hurts, and it ultimately kills her. It's lovely. Wherever Olivia is, I hope she's doing good. Though she's probably dead, because it was like, I don't know when this was placed, but this was before TVs were made, so sayonara. I don't know what I'm doing here. I should tell you the story. By the way, if you came in the middle or something, that was Madeleine by, oh dear, who was it by? Barbara Hambly, the person who edited this book. So check them out. Next one is pretty triggering. It's called Mama by Steve and Melanie Tem. I shouldn't say pretty triggering because that's really vague. I meant like content warning ahead. This has to do with like child abuse by the hands of their parents. So if you don't want to hear that, this is your warning. Let me take another drink so maybe I'll stumble around less. I don't have no idea what's happening tonight. Again, it is cold and wet, and I just want to go to sleep. Okay. Mama by Steve and Melanie Tem. Elizabeth's mother was dead, which was a shame because right now Elizabeth wanted to kill her herself. She guessed she didn't mean that. She guessed it wasn't Mama's fault that she'd gotten the cancer. No, that wasn't true either. Mama deserved the cancer because she'd always smoked. Smoked in secret in the bathroom and in the garage, but everyone knew about it. They just pretended they didn't know. That was the kind of power Mama had. Dad had pretended so well that one time he smelled cigarette smoke outside Elizabeth's room, and he'd yelled at her, accused her of it, until he realized it was Mama who had done it, and he'd looked all embarrassed. And then he looked angry, and he'd said, "But someday it will be you, Elizabeth. You're just like her." And then he'd stomped away, and Elizabeth felt like she'd been slapped in the face. That was another reason for being mad at Mama, she guessed. Everybody said she was just like her Mama. She had her Mama's face, her Mama's temper. Dad said he couldn't tell how she was going to feel about anything from 1 minute to the next. Dad said she was moody like Mama, too. That meant she got depressed like Mama. Sometimes she wondered if maybe it had really been Mama's depression that had given her the cancer. Mama had been depressed as long as Elizabeth could remember. Sometimes she'd stayed in bed for days, just lying there like a dead person with no interest in anything. The only reason Elizabeth knew she wasn't dead was because Dad took Mama trays sometimes, and sometimes there'd be a little bit of food missing. But lots of times that was the only way to tell, and that had scared Elizabeth bad. What if Mama had been dead for days, and Dad just hadn't been brave enough to tell them yet? They'd never know. Parents never let kids know anything, even kids as old as 14. When Mama got depressed, it was like she wanted to be dead. She was just waiting for somebody to notice and bury her. It was scary because Elizabeth knew exactly what that felt like. It was all so dramatic, like a soap opera. All that gave Mama lots of power. Before anybody in the family did anything, they first had to figure out how it might affect Mama. There was no telling what might make her mad or make her depressed. Everybody got exhausted trying to figure out what Mama wanted, until finally they didn't have any life left for themselves. Some days Elizabeth wanted to be like that, to lie down, to give up, to be dead and still have everybody focusing on you, to use up their life because you didn't have any of your own left to use. Mama had been selfish. She deserved to die, which was a terrible thing to be thinking. It made Elizabeth feel awful, which made her even more furious with her mother. Not that she hadn't thought of that same thing lots of times before. She'd even said it in a couple of their fights when she'd said everything else she could think of. I hate you. You're the worst mother in the whole world. I wish I didn't even have a mother. I wish you were dead. That was why Mama had died. Elizabeth was 14, and she knew better than that. Everybody she knew hated their parents, and their parents didn't die. Leave it to Mama to do something that would embarrass her and make her feel bad all at the same time. Mama was always on her case. Nothing she ever did was good enough. One time, Mama started crying and said she felt the same way, like nothing she ever did was good enough for Elizabeth. It had made Elizabeth feel so guilty to see her mother cry, like she was supposed to do something and she didn't know what. So she just walked out of the room and then out of the house. She wasn't running away or anything. She just needed to get away from her mother. I'm sorry, Mama. You were good enough. Please come back. Please don't be dead. Elizabeth was also old enough to know that just because she'd wished so hard and so often that she had a mother again, just because she kept having those dumb dreams that Mama came back to life, that didn't mean that Mama would come back to life. Stuff like that didn't happen except in the movies. Once your mother died and left you, she was gone forever. But now, all of a sudden, Mama wasn't dead anymore, just like all those times she'd been too depressed to get out of bed, and Dad had kept her back in the bedroom and hid her and fed her like he was in her power and had no other choice. Now here she was, yelling at Elizabeth for coming home late last night, and Elizabeth was really pissed, just like always, and her mother was dead 6 months. Mama had had her way again. She turned everything upside down. You're grounded, Mama yelled. You're dead, Elizabeth yelled back, and the power of saying that took her breath away. She wanted to tell Mama she was sorry, but she was too scared. She'd gone to a memorial service, but she actually hadn't seen Mama's body. Had Dad been keeping her in the bedroom all that time? What was Mama trying to pull now? Just because she was her mother didn't mean that she could do anything she damn well wanted. It made Elizabeth hate her Dad just for a minute. It was too scary to hate him for any longer than that. But he should have told them. They had a right to know, even if they were only kids. He was just so weak where Mama was concerned. Sometimes her dad was so weak, Elizabeth thought she would die. She stormed out of the room and on out of the house, making a show of ignoring her mother calling her name behind her. She was going for a walk, for God's sakes. She wasn't some little kid. She went over to Stacy's house. Stacy used to be her best friend before that boyfriend of hers came along. Stacy didn't have much time for her after that. So do you like it better this way? Stacy pushed up the back of her hair, making it flop down in front. Or this way? She pulled down hard on the ends, straightening the curl out. Stacy, did you hear me? I said my mother's not dead anymore. She came back today. Stacy looked at her out of one eye, the other one hiding behind a big fall of hair. That's a sick joke, Liz. She was your mother, after all. Stacy, you gotta let me stay here. I'm scared. I can't. Stacy turned back to the mirror behind them, playing with her hair. See, I've got a date tonight. And Mom says I can't have girlfriends over if I'm just gonna leave. Stacy, I'm sorry, okay? My mom's a bitch sometimes. I can't help it. You're supposed to be my friend. Stacy looked at her then, trying to look serious, and that just made Elizabeth even angrier. Liz, really, this isn't real. Your mom's dead. I went to the funeral, remember? You ought to see somebody. I mean, your mom, she's been screwing with your head for years, making you feel guilty about everything. I mean, you always said you couldn't please her. Now she's dead and she's still doing it to you. Your mom, I know you loved her and everything, but she could be a real bitch sometimes. My mama wasn't a bitch. Elizabeth didn't mean to, but she slapped Stacy as hard as she could. Stacy fell back against the mirror with her hair flying everywhere, and she just started bawling, just like a baby. But it wasn't funny. Elizabeth felt like she'd just done the worst thing. She was so scared she jumped up and ran out of Stacy's house, and Stacy's mom was screaming behind her and cursing, and Elizabeth couldn't help it, but she kept wondering if her mama would still stand up for her the same way. It was on the way home that she finally started figuring things out. Her dad and mama had done something weird. They'd wanted people to think mama was dead for some stupid reason, and because she and Mark were just kids, they hadn't told them anything. Typical. It made her really angry, like they didn't care how she felt. Sure, mama stayed inside the house, in the shadows, so now mama was some dirty little secret in the family, something perverted. Elizabeth was already feeling dirty because she tried to tell Stacy about mama. She wasn't going to try that again. She'd just pretend like dad and mama were pretending. Maybe she'd talk to Mark about it. They'd have some kind of a plan together that would show them. When she got back, mama screamed at her for being late, like she'd had permission to go in the first place. What a laugh. Elizabeth didn't even argue. That way mama would know how really mad she was at her. Dad used to really hate it when Elizabeth and her mother fought. Sometimes he'd go back and forth between them, trying to explain to each of them what the other one had meant, or what the other one was feeling. Once in a while that worked, but usually they both just ended up mad at him too, and Elizabeth would feel a little sorry for him. "You're so much alike," he'd say, kind of helplessly. Everybody always said that. That was not what Elizabeth wanted to hear, although secretly it made her kind of proud. She knew it wasn't what Mama wanted to hear either, and that hurt her feelings. Dad would tell Elizabeth, "You know, a lot of girls your age have trouble with their mothers, especially when they've been close like you and your mother have been. You guys love each other. You'll get through it." Now, of course, they never would. Even if Mama wasn't really dead after all, things couldn't be fixed. Not after they'd lied to her and her brother. Not after they'd made their family weird. Tears burned her eyes, and she rubbed them away hard with her knuckles. She was not going to cry anymore about her mother. She was not. She'd been crying practically nonstop for 6 months. But she was crying when Mark came rattling up behind her on his rollerblades, grabbed her around the waist, and spun her halfway around so she practically fell down, and whooped, "Yo, Lizzie!" She loathed it when he called her Lizzie, which, naturally, was why he did it. At least he had made her stop crying. "You little turd! You big butthead," he yelled, and then he giggled his silly little giggle like he always did, like everything was just one big joke to him, and the joke was always on her. He took off past her. For a 12-year-old creep, he was pretty good on those rollerblades, but she wouldn't tell him that in a million years. She watched him speed around the corner and made herself not hurry up to see where he went from there. She was not going to worry about him. She was not going to take care of him. She was not going to be his mother. She'd figure out some way to tell him about what Dad and Mama had done, the right way so that he wouldn't freak out or anything. Since Mama died, Elizabeth had felt so sorry for Dad that she couldn't stand to be around him. He went to work every day and he came home every night, and he tried really hard to take care of Mark and Elizabeth, even though Elizabeth tried to show him she didn't need anybody to take care of her. The clothes got washed and the meals got cooked, and as far as she knew, the bills got paid, and he showed up at their school stuff and he helped Mark with his homework, but his heart didn't seem to be in it. But now that she knew the truth about Mama, she didn't know what to feel about Dad. He'd lied to her for months. It was just so sick, the kind of sick only adults could do. It was scary. Pause to drink. Once, maybe a week after Mama died, after Dad said she died, when Elizabeth was just starting to realize what it meant, she'd asked him, "Are you ever going to be happy again?" She'd expected him to say something like, "Sure, honey, of course I'll be happy again," even though she wouldn't have believed it, even though she'd have been furious to think he could ever be happy with Mama. It still would have been a relief. But he didn't. He looked at her with a sad face like she didn't know a human being could have, and he'd said, "I don't know, honey. I don't know anything about what happens next." But knowing now that Mama had been alive all along, she didn't know what to think about what Dad had said that day. She knew he'd been terribly, terribly sad. Dad had never been able to hide his true feelings about anything. But now she had no idea what he'd been sad about. Maybe the whole sick thing had been Mama's idea. Mama had done something to him to make him like that. She'd been doing something to him for years. That was the only explanation. He had no backbone. He was like some kind of slimy jellyfish. He had no life of his own. He'd given it all to Mama. But he was so pale and depressed. And he was so pale, depressed, and he moved so slowly these days. Now Elizabeth was afraid of losing him. Mama had come up with something terrible and made Dad go along with it. And now it was killing him. She had to do something. She went for a long walk. She thought about school. She thought about how all her friends were getting their ears double pierced and some triple. She thought about how she was never going to get a boyfriend because she was dumb and ugly. She thought about how Stacy would never be her friend anymore. She thought about everything she could think of that wasn't Mama. But Mama got in there anyway. Everything she thought about came back to Mama. Mama saying maybe they ought to get her a tutor for algebra, which was just what she needed, to have to think about stupid algebra even more, like she was ever going to need x parentheses x minus y parentheses in real life. How do you even read that? Mama laughing and saying she didn't care how many holes Elizabeth got in her ears if Elizabeth paid for it with her own money, and not to worry about Dad, he'd get used to it. Mama telling her she was beautiful and smart and a nice person and interesting, and just wait, pretty soon she'd have to beat them off with a stick. Missing her mother made Elizabeth's stomach hurt. She missed her mother. She wanted her mother to come back. That ought to count for something, how much she wanted Mama. It didn't, though. When somebody was dead, they were dead. But Mama was back. It had all been a trick. She was in the house, as always, making breakfast. And it was Dad who was looking pale, sick, and depressed, like he wanted to die, like Mama had taken everything away from him, like Mama had gotten her way again and he had taken Mama's place. But Elizabeth hadn't gotten Mama back either, because of the trick, and Mama had changed, and nothing would ever be right again. Elizabeth kept walking and walking. Tears kept trickling down her cheeks, but she was determined not to cry anymore. Elizabeth! Breakfast! She was right back by her own house, and that was Mama calling her. Elizabeth didn't know what was going on, but her mind refused to think about it anymore, so she just gave up and went inside. Mark was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, reading his comics. He stuck his tongue out at her. She grabbed the paper out of his hands and tore it some, but she got it. Brat. Mark whined, "Mama, she stole the comics." And Mama, standing at the stove just like she always did, said over her shoulder, "Now, children, let's have some peace while we eat." Just like she always did. And Elizabeth thought, as hard as she could, Mama's dead. Mark was so dumb, just like a little kid. If he knew something was wrong with Mama being back and everything, he sure didn't act like it. He acted like everything was normal. But then a little kid wouldn't know something was perverted even if he saw it. It was too scary. Oh my God. It was scary. Now she was afraid something was wrong with Mark too. She pulled a handful of sticky, linty gumdrops out of her sweatshirt pocket and stuffed them into her mouth. Mama crossed to the sink and opened up the window, just like she always did. Elizabeth hated that. Mark hated that. Dad hated that. The whole family complained about Mama's thing for fresh air. Dead of winter, middle of the night, first thing in the morning, it didn't matter. They could all freeze to death just so Mama could get her fresh air. Elizabeth pushed the gumdrops out of her mouth with her tongue, the gross, chewed-up mess into her hand. Mama would give her hell for eating sugar before breakfast. Mama didn't notice, though. She was busy scraping the eggs out of the cast-iron skillet. No aluminum for her, good old-fashioned cast iron, which Elizabeth thought was disgusting because it had little grooves in it where bits of food could hide and black stuff came off on the dish towels. Just like in her dreams, Mama cooking breakfast in the big cast-iron skillets, Mama raking the yard, ironing Dad's shirts, loading the dishwasher, letting everybody else know what to think, how to feel, just by the way she looked at you, doing all the stuff she always did that kept the house going and you didn't even notice until she wasn't around anymore to do it. except Mama was supposed to be dead. They'd lied. Then Mama turned and looked at Elizabeth. Her eyes were as black as the skillet bottoms and way too big. "Don't you feel good, Elizabeth? You look a little peaked. Maybe you should stay home from school today and rest. I'll take care of you, sweetheart," she said, and grinned. Mama doesn't grin like that. Mama never calls me sweetheart. "Hey," complained Mark. "No fair." "Don't worry about it, baby," she said to him. Not daring to say anything to her mother, she felt herself backing away, scared that her mother might touch her. "I'm going to school. I've got an algebra test." Mama set a plate full of fried eggs in front of each of them. Elizabeth went to the bathroom to get rid of the gooey gumdrops in her hand. She heard Mark say, "Yuck, there's yolk in mine." And it kind of gave her the creeps because he'd never, in his whole life, liked yolks, and their mother knew that, if she was their real mother, which she shouldn't be, because their mother was dead. When she came back into the kitchen, Mama was standing behind Mark with her hands on his shoulders. Mama's face was tight and stiff like when she was really mad, and she was pinching Mark's shoulders hard. Then she grinned and wrapped her arms around him, tighter, so that Elizabeth saw his face go pale, as if Mama were squeezing the life and blood right out of him. He looked kind of sick, but he was still eating his eggs. She should have done something, gotten Mark alone and talked to him, but she didn't know what to say. He was just a little kid, really. She was alone in this. It was all up to her. Elizabeth didn't even look at her eggs. She just grabbed her books off the counter and practically ran out of the house, mumbling that she'd get breakfast at school and she had to study algebra. Mama was paying too much attention to Mark to even try to stop her. The algebra test wasn't that bad, and she thought she passed it. Not that she much cared. She thought about not going home from school, and she walked around for a while, but Stacy wasn't her friend anymore. She didn't say anything or even look at her all day, and Elizabeth couldn't think of anywhere else to go. She wanted so badly to tell somebody what her parents had done, whatever they had done, but she knew it must be too dirty a secret to tell. When she got home, Mark was sick in bed. Dad was there, home early from work, taking care of him. She didn't see Mama. "He's running a little fever, honey," Dad said, but it didn't look like a little fever. Mark was shaking all over. At first she thought maybe Mark was faking, but he kept throwing up. Even water made him throw up. His skin was the color of concrete. Dad said too many times, "It's just the flu. Everybody gets the flu." But Elizabeth saw how worried he looked, and she didn't want to see, so she went to her room and shut the door and sat on her bed for a while, trying not to think about Mama. Pause to drink again. She thought about whether she should tell Heather what Julie had said about her. "You should be the one who stops gossip," Mama would have said. But maybe if she told Heather, then Heather would be her friend and let her stay at her house. She thought about Jeff. He was pretty much of a jerk. And that's what it says. He was pretty much of a jerk. And she was sure he did drugs, and she didn't understand why she was so attracted to him. "He's dangerous," Mama told her. "Lots of women find dangerous men attractive. Nothing wrong with feeling that way, but you don't have to act on your feelings." Elizabeth threw herself face down on her bed and covered her head with her pillow. "Mama is dead." "It's not fair," Mama said, not loud, but in a way that Elizabeth knew meant she was really, really mad. "I've been cheated." "I've been cheated, too," Elizabeth found herself thinking, and fell asleep, and dreamed that Mama was in Mark's room, taking care of him, grinning, wrapping her arms around him, hugging him, hurting him too, making him sick. Mark died before morning. Elizabeth woke up because Dad was moaning, and she didn't want to go see what was the matter, but she couldn't help it. Dad was on Mark's bed, crying, with Mark's body in his arms, and Mama was standing in the shadows with her hands over her face. "Oh, honey," Mama said softly, and went over to Elizabeth. And before Elizabeth could pull away, Mama kissed her lightly on the cheek with lips as dry as dead leaves, lips that smelled of earth and insects, but most of all, of copper. "You should have called the doctor," she accused her father, then felt terrible for talking to him like that, for putting him through even more pain. I know, he said from his chair in the shadows. "I don't know what's the matter with me. Sometimes I know what I should be doing about something, and I think about it, but for some reason I can't seem to do anything." His voice sounded weak, kind of crackly, as if he were speaking to her on a long-distance connection. "I just want to sit here I just want to sit and do nothing. But Daddy, you have to take care of Mark. His body? Daddy, please. Honey, it's okay. I took care of things. They came for it while you were sleeping. But the funeral, we'll have it later, honey. A memorial service at least, with the neighbors and Mark's friends. There'll be time. I'm going to ask them to cremate the body. I think that would be best. Daddy, hush now, baby, hush. Daddy, it was Mama's idea, wasn't it? Having Mark cremated so people wouldn't find out what she did? Baby, oh honey, Dad pulled her close. I'm so sorry. I should have paid more attention. We all loved your mom very much, but she's dead, honey. She's dead. Elizabeth pulled away and looked at him. He thought he was telling the truth. She could see it in his eyes. Daddy? Daddy? But he was crying and couldn't answer her anymore. Elizabeth got up and started for the door, but stopped when she saw her mother standing there in the shadows. You don't feel good, Elizabeth. It's understandable. Maybe you should stay home from school today and rest. Mama will take care of you, sweetheart, she said, and grinned with something dark staining the grin, and held her soft, mothering arms out to hug her, but Elizabeth pushed past, shuddering. She didn't go to school the next day, or the day after that. Her dad understood, of course. He knew she was grieving. He'd just call in sick for her and explain everything later. He'd take care of her. But he couldn't. Sure, she was grieving, but she was staying home because she had to take care of him. She tried to call Stacy to apologize, but the phone was dead. She wondered if maybe her dad had disconnected it so that he wouldn't have to talk to anybody. But then she wondered if maybe Mama had something to do with it. She could go out, tell the police or something, but she and Mark were the only ones who had seen Mama, and now it was just her. She wasn't a kid anymore, but they would think she was. Nobody listened to kids. They treated them like crazy people. They'd put her in the hospital or something, and then Dad would be all alone with Mama. She couldn't leave him alone in the house, not even for a minute. All day long, Elizabeth's mother walked back and forth in front of her father's door, waiting, but her father never came out, not once. He might be dying in there, but if she opened her father's door, then Mama might get in there, and then she'd lose her daddy too. Elizabeth knew she was going to be left all alone in the house with her mother, who was dead, who had been dead for months. Over the next couple of days, people knocked at the front door, but they always went away. Elizabeth was afraid to go to the door, afraid of what Mama might do if somebody else learned about their perverted secret. Elizabeth tried to learn as much as she could about Mama's new routine. It made her feel a little safer. Every morning, Mama shuffled slowly out of her bedroom as if she had almost no strength left for the day. Sometimes she had all her clothes on, but sometimes she just wore a big torn slip. After an hour or so of standing in the hall outside her dad's bedroom door, Mama started walking around the house, avoiding the windows and just walking like she'd forgotten what it was she was supposed to do. Sometimes she'd stop walking and stand there with her head kind of sideways, like she was listening for something. But maybe she'd forgotten what it was she was listening for. Sometimes Mama would fix something on the stove and then just throw it into the garbage. Sometimes Elizabeth would see Mama eating flies. Sometimes Elizabeth would see a mouse's head poke itself suddenly out of Mama's mouth before being pulled back inside again. Sometimes Mama's chin would be covered with blood. Elizabeth stayed out of Mama's way the best she could, and although she didn't exactly understand why, she figured she was pretty safe as long as Mama kept hanging around outside her daddy's bedroom door. It wasn't too hard staying out of Mama's way. She seemed pretty sleepy most of the time, like she'd had too much to eat or drink. Sometimes Mama would call out her name, though. Sometimes Mama would look into Elizabeth's empty room she'd stopped sleeping in there days ago and say, "Elizabeth, Elizabeth, honey, do you need a hug? Let me give you a hug, sweetheart." And it would make Elizabeth depressed because Mama had never hugged her very much before, not like her friends' moms. And she'd always wanted her mama to hug her like those moms did. She did need a hug right now for sure, but not from Mama. And after a while, she started seeing Mark around the house. And then she knew her daddy had never gotten around to ordering the cremation. And she was almost glad, but not quite. Sometimes Mark would walk through the house and eat flies, and call out to Elizabeth with sugar in his voice, asking if she would give him a hug too. And then he'd giggle, just like he used to, just like it was all a big joke he'd pulled on her. Finally, one night, when she could hear Mama and Mark in another room moving around and bumping into furniture and chasing things, Elizabeth slipped into her father's bedroom. He was lying there on the floor in the dark, very, very still. But she figured if she could just get him off the floor, she could help him out of the house. And they could stay at the neighbor's house or in a hotel somewhere until they could figure out what else to do. But then Elizabeth saw that her daddy didn't have a face anymore, just part of a tongue sticking out with teeth marks along the edges where it had been chewed. And most of one leg was gone. But still, she kept asking him if he would stand up, if he was ready to go now, but he didn't say a word. She'd let him down, just like with Mama. She hadn't been good enough. Elizabeth was in the house alone with Mama and Mark. They'd never let her go. Even if she walked out the back door, nobody would believe her, and anyway, Mark and Mama would never let her go. And it was almost time for her period, maybe only a couple of days away. And Elizabeth didn't want to think about how Mama and her brother were going to act when her period came. So that's why she's waiting in the kitchen now for Mama and Mark to come into the room and find her. Everybody always said she was just like her mother anyway. She guessed it must be true. They were always saying it. And now look at Mama crawling into the room on her hands and knees and licking Elizabeth's feet. And there's Mark licking her hand and getting up, getting closer. I'm ready for my hug now, she says, trying to keep her voice steady as her mother and brother come closer and wrap her in their terrible long arms and squeeze her in her family's cold embrace until she isn't alone anymore. I'm ready, she says, smiling, thinking maybe that at last her mama would be pleased that now she was so much like her, but the joke would be on Mama with her dirty little grown-up secret, because Elizabeth would be even better than Mama, even stronger. Okay. That was Mama by Steve and Melanie Tim. And my God, that was a good story. Holy crap. It did, I don't necessarily want to say it dragged at the beginning, because I don't think it did. It did occur to me that there was a lot of talk of how Mama was dead and everything was wrong. There was a lot of sadness, but it was also, like, made sense for the character. I can't really blame, like, a 14-year-old for lingering on how screwed up the situation was. But, like, half of the story is, man, this is a screwed up situation, and then we get, like, the actual creepiness. I don't know what I'm saying. I do overall like it. I do. I'm not just saying that. I really like the story. I wish we had a little bit of more of Mark before he died. I think it'd just been, like, it's a little sweeter if we'd seen them interact a little bit more. Have her interact with her family just a little bit more before everything goes south so quickly. But again, I liked it. I hope you guys liked it too. And we're going to read one more story. How much time we have? Yeah. There's room for one more story. Which will be Survival Skills by Deborah Wheeler. I think this is the funny one. It's a cute little... Yeah, I think this is a funny one. Don't hold me to that, though. Yeah. Okay. Valeria woke to deep rumbling. Felt rather than heard. The San Francisco quake? She wondered. Nepal's in the shadow of Vesuvius? Gas in her bowels? Could be. Animal rights activists always gave her indigestion. Boom, boom, boom. The rumbling resolved into a basso rhythm. Not even triple-paned glass and blackout curtains could keep out the drumbeat bursting from her neighbor's garage. She supposed it was some form of rock music, although it reminded her of a steam engine with hiccups. Boom, boom, boom. Where else but California, Hollywood, to be precise. As Valeria sat up, the waterbed mattress of her coffin oozed under her weight. Condensation had turned the native soil within it to mud. In the velvety darkness, she circled the living room, checking the locks on doors and windows. Her nerves prickled, a sign of her hunger. She would have hunted last night, she knew, but she was trying to diet. Through the rumbling, Valeria heard the tapping of the footsteps up the stairs. Smiling, she headed for the front door. With any luck, breakfast had come to her. She remembered to flick on the lights. The man on the doorstep carried a clipboard bristling with papers. He waved a badge in her direction, then shoved it back in the pocket of his rumpled avocado-colored jacket. Mrs. Romanek? Valeria nodded, deciding it would be imprudent for him to disappear in her vicinity. Someone else with a badge. I did kind of say a badge. Someone else with a badge would surely come looking for him. Nobody minded his own business in the century. Good Lord, my brain is oozing out. I hate winter. Truly. I get so sad during it. I've been so depressed. Oh my god. You didn't need to know that. I told you anyway. Get over it. It's my book club. I do what I want. God. The man on the doorstep carried a clipboard bristling with papers. He waved a badge in her direction, then shoved it back in the pocket of his rumpled avocado-colored jacket. Mrs. Romanek? Valeria nodded, deciding it would be imprudent for him to disappear in her vicinity. Somebody else with a badge would surely come looking for him. Nobody minded his own business in this century. Leo Martinez, L.A. Unified Child and Welfare Attendance Counselor. That's a newfangled way of saying truant, officer. I'm investigating an anonymous tip that you have 2 children who are not currently enrolled in school. May I come in? This really was too bizarre. Valeria thought, a human asking permission to cross her threshold. But refusing would not change the fact that the authorities had become aware of her and her children. Records already existed of that complaint, from some snoopy neighbor, no doubt. Records on those darnable computer networks. She must cause them to become unsuspicious as quickly as possible. She led the way to the living room. With the indirect lighting system she'd installed, it suggested a cavern. The central skylight had been roofed over, and the cobwebs were finally thick enough to give the ceiling a pleasingly decrepit appearance. The few pieces of age-darkened furniture blended into the shadows. Martinez brushed a layer of dust from the sofa and sat down, glancing around. Now then, you have 2 children? And how old are they? Valeria tried to reckon how old Kyra and Jess looked in human terms. She'd kept them with her far longer than her own mother had done with her and her sisters. 300 years ago, a child wandering alone and apparently helpless was nothing more than an easy victim or an unpleasantness to be ignored. But today, they could not be turned loose until they looked adult. Who knew how many vampire parents had been driven insane in this century, when the terrible twos might last for several decades? She made a guess at 10 and 8 years old, adding, I teach them everything they need to know. Homeschooling, eh? You're a certified teacher? Not exactly. Mrs. Romanek, today's society is even more complicated than ever, and we have to give our children every advantage if they're to compete successfully. The 3 R's are only the beginning of what a child needs. That's why we offer special classes in computers and, you do not understand, my children have a rare condition and allergy to sunlight. They cannot leave the house except at night. Oh, that explains why this place is sealed up so tight. Must be some allergy. Martinez smiled, showing even white teeth. He probably had no idea how threatening the expression was. Normally, we would require a doctor's certificate for an exemption, but I can offer you a better solution. Last year, we received a grant for families whose parents work at night. Classes start at 9 p.m. He slipped a fresh form on top of the stack in his clipboard and clicked his pen open. Sign here, please. Valeria scrawled something illegible on the form. She had learned over the years to avoid outright confrontation with authorities. It was far safer to quietly disappear. After Martinez left, the children crept out from the bedroom. They wore their usual hunting clothes, torn and stained as if they'd been foraging in the alleys, which of course they had. One glance at their faces told Valeria they'd overheard the entire conversation. Do we have to move again? Kyra asked. Relocating involved safeguarding their supplies of native earth. traveling at night and securing new accommodations, as well as protecting the hoard of uncanceled postage stamps, which furnished Valeria's income. She still had 2 penny blacks in her cache, although it was getting more difficult to sell them to private collectors, even that Japanese, without documentation. Reluctantly, she nodded. We have no alternative. We could do what he said, Jess piped up. Send you to school? Impossible. Jess marched up to her, Kyra at his heels. You've taught us to hunt in stranger places. Do you have any idea of the risk involved? Valeria shrieked. She had not felt such roiling anxiety since she fled Victorian London. Her mate had perished when his coffin was discovered empty one night, stolen, and subsequently sold to a museum in Auckland as an Etruscan watering trowel. This is not the beaches or video arcades. One slipped, and the authorities will surely take notice. Both children immediately hushed. Once, when they had been particularly disobedient, she'd taken them to a Dracula movie. They emerged from the theater whimpering from the graphic depiction of stakes driven through the heart, crosses branded on naked skin, coffins splintered or set ablaze, fresh crumbling into dust at the touch of dawn. You be good, she told them, or the Van Helsing will get you. This time Jess held his ground. No one will notice us. We're good at blending in. You said so yourself. Come back here. Thank you. And besides, he paused. It's so boring having to stay here when we're not out hunting. There's nothing to do. Kyra's eyes brightened. Please? We'll be good, we promise. In the end, Valeria gave in. After all, they had far more discipline than she'd had at their age. If they could successfully pass as humans, then a short attendance at the school might buy them all some precious time, and maybe lead to a solution to those blasted computers. Before the children left the first night, Valeria reminded them, keep your fangs retracted at all times. No draining, no sipping, and absolutely no turning into bats. Yes, Mama, Kyra murmured. In her new clothes, she looked like a street waif who'd been given a bath in whitewash. Jess's mouth twitched, and Valeria glared at him, her eyes flashing red, until he squirmed and hung his head. She grasped his hand in hers, hard enough to snap the bones of a normal child, and led them to the neighborhood school. She'd surveyed it earlier when delivering the forged immunization vaccine papers, whatever. I can say this word. I don't know, man. Not tonight, I can't say it. They delivered those papers to the office. This time, a uniformed guard stood just inside the gate. It was too late to retreat without drawing attention to herself. Valeria pressed her lips together and passed him at a stately walk, not daring to respond when he nodded to her. After the teachers led the children into the classroom, Valeria glided into the shadows. She kept turning back, wondering what was happening, what sort of catastrophe might be brewing. She'd never been inside a modern school. She had no idea what the other children might say or do, or how Kyra and Jess might react. There was so much she hadn't warned them about. Suppose another child offered them bubble gum. Fretfully, she went to hunt, selecting several out-of-town businessmen. She sipped shallowly so as not to render them seriously anemic, and left them with a post-hypnotic suggestion to contribute generously to the Wildlife Fund's Save the Bats campaign. At the end of the school session, she arrived early to find a cluster of parents standing in the pooled streetlight. One of them, a wiry, pale-haired woman, spotted Valeria and marched up to her, hand outstretched. Hi, I'm Marge, PTA Hospitality. Here's my phone number, and I'd like to personally invite you to our planning committee, meeting this Friday, 10 p.m. There are so many ways you can help improve the school. Class parent, library volunteer, bake sale for the open house. Valeria gave Marge her coldest, most predatory stare. Marge seemed not to notice. Assisting in our new science lab, running a booth for our Halloween festival. It's our big fundraiser. No, forget the booth. I'm drafting you for our raffle, hostess. Marge slipped one hand through the crook of Valeria's elbow and drew her toward the other parents. Valeria was too surprised to resist. Hey, Al. We've got a new recruit here. Won't she make a great Lady Dracula? Valeria nearly dropped her fangs. She was so horrified. How had she given herself away? Oh, perfect, one of the men said. Camp is camp, but another year of Raoul as Elvira is just too much. Someone else said, do you work in the industry? Industry? Valeria asked, desperate to change the conversation. You know, the man named Al said. Movies, TV, live theater, showbiz. He looked vaguely familiar, and she realized with a shock that he was her rock music neighbor. She lifted her chin and said in her iciest voice, certainly not. Too bad. You have great stage presence. The group of parents turned, like birds swerving in flight, as the children began filing out, each class behind its own teacher. Valeria could see no bruises or torn clothing, no signs of dried blood. Kyra and Jess rushed forward with the rest of their classmates, their faces alight. As Valeria hurried away, a child in each hand, Marge's voice floated after her. We'll see you at our next meeting. Valeria locked the door behind them, although she didn't bother turning on the lights. What happened? Did either of you draw attention to yourselves? Only when the other kids ate their meals, said Jess. The teacher was upset that we didn't have any, so she gave us tickets to get ours in the cafeteria. We hid in the toilet until it was time to go back to class, Kyra added, her eyes big. I didn't hide in a toilet, said Jess. Kyra punched him hard enough to send him tumbling over the arm of the sofa. Valeria reached out to prevent Jess from retaliating. Remember your manners, both of you. Is this how the other children at school behave? Yes, Kyra said sweetly. Well, this is the one thing you are not to learn from them, is that clear? But Mom, Kyra looked thoughtful, what if someone bites me first? She held out her arm unmarked, but Valeria sensed the pressure residues from an arc of human teeth. Carlos just said, somewhat smugly. And I didn't bite him back, Kyra sniffed. And then Carlos said it was because one of his teeth was loose. Loose! Kyra echoed dramatically. Yeah, Jess rattled on, growing more expansive with every phrase, and it's gonna fall out. And then, Kyra concluded triumphantly, the tooth fairy is going to come and put new teeth under his pillow. If Valeria hadn't been so anxious, she would have laughed. Neither Jess nor Kyra had been allowed to hunt human children. How could they know? I assure you that no matter what happens to Carlos's teeth, she said, yours will not fall out. They will enlarge naturally as you grow. What you do about this Carlos is to stay as far away from him as possible. Once the children had gotten the meal routine down and learned to ask to go to the bathroom from time to time, things went relatively smoothly. Every day they brought home drawings, PTA announcements, and homework assignments. Once they emerged from class with a grubby-faced boy in tow. This is Carlos, Jess said proudly. He wants to come home with us. Absolutely not, Valeria said. I won't bite her no more, Carlos grinned, revealing a large gap between his top teeth. I'm quite sure you won't, but you nevertheless cannot come home with us. Valeria grabbed Jess and Kyra by the hands and hurried them away from the schoolyard and down a side street. When they were out of earshot, she demanded, no hunting at school. And a child, too. We weren't, Jess began. Then what were you going to do with him? Keep him as a pet? Well, said Kyra, brightening, how many times do I have to tell you not to play with your food? Okay, we get the point, Jess said. Then how about a VCR instead? There are all these great cartoons we could tape on Saturday mornings, Kyra piped up, and I want 6 Barbies, just like Allison. Barbies? Ew, gross. Jess rolled his eyes. And dino doodles, and a skateboard, and my first telephone. That's enough, both of you, Valeria cried with such force the children flinched. They looked at her with bright, accusing eyes, and she couldn't think of a suitable follow-up. They'd never hounded her for toys before. She didn't know what half the things they'd asked for were. When they got home, she found the slip of paper with Marge's phone number and called up to ask what other mothers did in such circumstances. I call that one the Great American Twinkie ploy, Marge laughed. My own kid never touched white sugar until the day he started kindergarten, and then he came home crazy for every sort of processed garbage. Valeria gave silent thanks there was one form of insanity her children had escaped. It's tough enough raising kids in this town on a normal schedule, Marge chattered on. There's a bunch of us who get together Friday nights at Pizza Land. You know, the one with the play area? We order a few beers, maybe an extra large with everything on it, and swap war stories. I do not drink beer. Me either. Never could stand the taste of the stuff. Don't worry, we've got other parents in AA too. Pizza Land was outside Valeria's normal hunting territory, and on Friday night, Saturday morning, by the time the half dozen of them were all settled in the corner table, the place was still doing a brisk business. Valeria sat down, dizzy from the lingering reek of garlic, as Marge made introductions all around. Valeria recognized some of the parents from the group that waited at the school gates. They worked at such places as all-night bars, a 24-hour health club, the industry, or nightclubs at Memorial Hospital. Or night shifts, my bad. Clubs at Memorial Hospital. And there's like people holding IV stands and shit. You know what the hardest thing is, one of the nurses said to Valeria. It's trying to give the kids the same sense of community as they get at an ordinary school. Marge, sitting across the table, nodded. That's why it's so important to put on family events like the Halloween festival. Valeria here is going to be Our Lady Dracula for the raffle. Marge has put you to work already, said Al, who was sitting on the opposite side of the table. How about helping out in the computer lab? It took us a solid year to get the equipment donated, and even now we don't have enough parent volunteers to staff it. Perhaps because they know nothing about computers, Valeria said haughtily. That's the easy part. My real job's designing security systems for computers. I can teach you more than you ever dreamed possible about them. You can? You will, Valeria blinked in surprise. She had read of ways to manipulate the information computers contained, change it, or even remove it entirely. If mortal hackers could break into closely guarded military systems, surely she could forge a driver's license or a credit history, or eliminate a school attendance record. Al grinned, his eyes crinkling. We'll count on you for Monday. Before Valeria could reply, Kyra and Jess came running up with the news that Carlos had invited them to play with his Nintendo set. Valeria opened her mouth to refuse. It's really all right. I'd love to have them, said Carlos's mother, a cashier at a 24-hour grocery. I'll pick them up after school and drop them at your place. Please, Mom, Jess and Kyra said in chorus. We'll talk about it later, Valeria said. It had been a long time since Valeria had walked along a hallway as noisy as the school's. Her ears quivered with a dozen jumbled rhythms, which made her neighbor's drumming seem sedate by comparison. It was almost as bad as the incessant clanging of the pipes during those 3 unpleasant years in the tunnels beneath the New York City subways. The door to the computer lab stood open, and she peeked in. Rows of tables filled the room, each one the center of a cluster of squirming, chattering children. At the far end of the room, Al looked up and gestured for her to come inside. Dodging several parents as they darted from one group to another in response to calls for help, Valeria made her way across the room. She looked over Al's shoulder at the computer screen. Every diagram was labeled, and a border running below the main display listed various codes, including one that said help. Could it, she wondered, truly be that simple? Al explained to her the children's current project, constructing a bar graph from the measurements of their heights. The thing to remember about computers is that they're powerful but very stupid. They'll do exactly what you tell them and nothing more. A truly human device, she murmured. Just make sure the kids follow the steps in order. If the computer irps on them, chances are they've made a typo. If you want to know more, we can hang around after class. Hang around? Valerie suppressed a smile at the image of 2 of them suspended by their feet from the ceiling. Despite her objections to his music, she did linger after the class had left. You pick this stuff up faster than anyone I've seen, Al said afterward. They went around the classroom, turning off the computers and picking up trash paper. It's just a set of instructions, she said, shrugging. Compared to the passport regulations for Romanian nationals resident in post-revolutionary France, or the laws of 16th century Nepal's, these rules were pitifully simple. I would like to learn more about computers, she said. Got the bug, huh? Well, there's a bunch of us hackers that get together Thursday nights at the high school. You're welcome to come. I do not possess one of those machines myself. That's no problem. There's usually someone selling a system cheap in order to upgrade. I'll make sure you get what you need. Valeria thought, you have no idea what I need. But then it occurred to her that she herself was no longer so sure that was what that was. She was no longer sure. Oh my god, I messed that up. It was fuck. But then it occurred to her that she herself was no longer so sure what that was. The computer lab meetings ran past school hours, so after some deliberation, Valeria allowed the children to play at Carlos's that night. It was a risk, but their behavior had improved considerably. Jess had even come home with a satisfactory mark in work habits and cooperation. The club members were something of a novelty to Valeria. They were almost as pale as she, either painfully thin or obese, their blood reeking of sugar and caffeine. Yet there was an irreverence about them she found appealing. They cared more about whether a problem was challenging than whether solving it was strictly legal. Before the evening was over, Valeria had purchased a used computer system, including a printer and modem. Al drove her home and helped her carry the equipment inside. He set it on the antique desk, connected the modem, and showed Valeria how to sign up for an electronic bulletin board. To her surprise, she detected the unmistakable traces of another vampire on the medical network, a trilingual pun on the word coffin, and a coded recognition signal in medieval Slavic. She suspected she'd met him before, maybe in Nepal's. He ran a service for hospitals and clinics, locating rare blood types. Al didn't seem to notice anything odd about it. A knock at the door signaled Carlos's mother, dropping off Kyra and Jess. They bounded in the front door, chattering about Carlos's new Nintendo game. What a dumb setup, Jess said. Can you believe it? There's a mummy, Frankenstein monster, and a werewolf, together with a real vampire. All of them up against this creepy Van Helsing. And guess who wins? The Van Helsing! Pathetic. Mom, I bet you could design a better game, said Kyra. Sounds great to me, said Al. You've got a real knack for the logic and a screwball imagination. I've got some game designer friends I could put you in touch with. For a moment, Valeria thought, why not? Computers used a language like any other, and languages, like regulations, were something with which she'd gained considerable faculty over the centuries. She could benefit from a second source of income, and she could certainly set her own hours. But what was wrong with her to consider working with a human? Bye, kids, Al said as he walked out the door. See you around, Val. Jess spotted the computer, which Al had left turned on. Wow, wait till Carlos sees this. Wait till Carlos nothing, said Valeria. I've warned you about developing friendships with mortals. Too late now, said Kyra breezily. So what about this computer dude of yours, Jess said. See ya, Val. Valeria glared at him. He swallowed. I guess this is a bad time to ask for a Nintendo set, huh? Very bad time. I think you're wrong about humans being so suspicious. Kyra ran one finger along the edge of the computer keyboard. When we started school, I was scared of making a mistake and having someone find out. But I had it all backward. Once they get to know you, you can do any kind of wacky thing and they won't care. Chances are, they won't even notice. Not in this town anyway, said Jess. You think we're weird, Mom? You should see some of the other kids' families. Marco's parents won't let him wear leather shoes. Tom's dad works in a job that's so secret it doesn't even exist. And Heather has 3 daddies, 2 iguanas, and a linear accelerator in the garage. I'll bet I can turn it into a bat in front of 100 people and no one will think anything strange. Don't you dare, Valeria said. Okay, Jess said. But after her initial spasm of relief had faded, Valeria thought he'd given in a bit too easily. On Halloween night, Valeria wore her festival costume, a long, stretchy black dress and wig. She set aside the false fangs in favor of the comfort of her own. Jess was going as a samurai turtle and Kyra a fairy with glitter-dusted wings. She'd promised them a night of true trick-or-treating afterward. The night of the festival was warm, the air tinged with firecracker smoke. Orange and black crepe paper streamers festooned the gymnasium, along with balloons and cardboard figures of skeletons, goblins, and witches. At the far end, a plywood castle dripped string spiderwebs and construction paper bats from its painted towers. Marge, dressed as Raggedy Ann with her wig of red yarn, a hair askew, waved hello as they entered. The room filled quickly with families and neighbors. Valeria's nerves tingled with the closeness of so many warm-blooded bodies. She made a slow circuit of the room, the booths where one could win a live goldfish, dunk a Barbie doll in a tub of water, or throw a whipped cream pie at one's teacher. "Good evening," came a voice at her shoulder. She whirled, controlling her attack reflex. It took a moment to recognize Al under the white face paint, false fangs. Lipstick dribbled over his chin. Swirling the folds of his high-collared black cape, he executed a theatrical bow and reached out to take her hand. She jerked it away just as he was about to kiss it. "Sorry," he said in his normal voice. "I didn't mean to scare you. You look really terrific in that outfit." Suddenly, a blood-curdling wail came from the top of the plywood castle, filling the gym as it degenerated into a mad cackle. A figure appeared next to the turret, its face a pale glimmer in the shadows. It spread its arms wide, extending bat-like wings to a chorus of gasps, and murmurs. A few children giggled in delight, crying "Batman" or "The Phantom," but Valeria stood frozen in horror. Too late to intervene without revealing herself, she watched Jess lean further and further until he began to fall. The audience cried out, pointing and howling with laughter. The next instant, he was gone, replaced by a flurry of tissue paper bats, swirling and swooping over the heads of the audience so that no one noticed a single real bat as it darted out the exit door. Wild applause burst out around Valeria. All around her, people exclaimed at what a realistic stunt that had been. Al plucked a paper bat from her hair. "I wonder where the school hired that stuntman. You could almost believe he was really going to fall. I expected some kind of wire harness flying act, but this was great." She stared at him, caught between fury at Jess and astonishment at how easily the mortal mind supplied a rational explanation. "Listen," he said, "we're having a block party Saturday night. You've probably heard our band practicing, huh? Well, fire up the old barbecue." "I cannot come," Valeria cut him off automatically. "We have certain dietary restrictions." "Oh," he waved one hand. Half the neighborhood is either vegetarian or kosher Jews, or on some crazy macrobiotic diet. Don't worry, just bring your own food. And your dancing feet, okay?" Valeria said she'd think about it. She was about to go looking for Jess when the raffle was announced. She managed to get through it, drawing the winning numbers from a large papier-mâché bowl in the shape of a human skull. A number of people came up to her afterward and complimented her on her costume, her makeup, even her fangs. "They look so real," one woman said. "It's simply wonderful what they can do with plastic these days." And now, Marge's voice came floating across the loudspeaker system, "For our special award to the most valuable new volunteer, for her outstanding contribution to the computer lab, as well as her memorable Lady Dracula impersonation, we will count on her to repeat it next year. I reward this certificate, redeemable for a steak dinner for two, to Ms. Valeria Romanek." The crowd applauded as Valeria made her way to the loudspeaker. Jess and Kyra, who had reappeared in the audience, jumped up and down, cheering. Several parents shook her hand or patted her on the back, almost dislodging the wig. Valeria looked out over the sea of faces, and for the first time she could remember, she did not feel afraid. Instead, she was filled with a mad bravado, a desire to equal Jess's spectacle. But what? What would these mortals think if she started feeding off them one by one? But Valeria realized with a shiver that was the one thing she could never do now. If the school community had made her into a sort of mascot, the reverse was also true. They belonged to her now. Marge and Carlos, and even rock music Al, all the children who played with her own and pestered her during computer lab. She would have to move in a few years before the children's slow growth became too noticeable, or the romantic attentions of Al too pressing. But until then, these bumbling, inept people had ensured their own survival. Valeria took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone, praying for inspiration. It came in an unexpected form. After all, this was Hollywood. "Thank you, everyone." Valeria bared her fangs and spread her arms wide in her most dramatic gesture. The wide sleeves of her costume swirled out like a cape. The audience fell silent, waiting. "You know, we vampires are just like ordinary people. We get up in the evening, go to work, meet our friends at the corner bar. I like a good Bloody Mary, especially if she's still alive and kicking." Laughter ripped from the crowd. Laughter ripped through the crowd. The uniformed guard in the front row guffawed. Valeria tingled all over. She'd never felt this wild exhilaration before. Better than flying. Ideas exploded in her mind like firecrackers. Of course, she went on. Being a vampire lends an entirely new meaning to many ordinary situations. Suppose, for example, someone says they've been dying to meet you, or asks you out for a steak dinner, or how about just hanging around? Speaking of which, did you hear the one about the Undertaker, the spaceman, and the vampire? She went on like that for more than 10 minutes, until tears ran down the faces of the people in the front row, and Marge was bending over, holding her sides. The audience ate up every moment of it. In fact, you might say they went bats. Okay. Survival skills. Oh, dears. Okay. Survival skills by Deborah Wheeler. A delightful, sweet little story after the pain that was the mama story. The mama story with the bad ending. This one was sweet and light and lovely. And, like, I'm not a parent. I don't know. It's just, I don't know. Maybe Deborah Wheeler, or I just made a name up. Maybe Deborah Wheeler is. I don't know. But it was really delightful watching this mom come to grow to love these humans and to care for them the way they care for her. I liked it. I hope you liked it. And that is the last story we are reading tonight. If you made it to the last story, holy shit, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. I don't expect many people to make it to the end, so if you're here, I love you. Welcome to my book club. You can never leave. I hope you're here next week, because I like to do these once a week on Sundays, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to keep reading this book until we're out of book. Again, it's Sisters of the Night by edited by Barbara Hambly and Martin H. Greenberg. I will see you guys next week. Thank you. Bye.